Two overtime wins last night kickstart our conversation today with the winning Pittsburgh Penguins and Edmonton Oilers making waves in the NHL. Plus, the Winnipeg Jets are trying to solve their attendance problem this season. Is it working? All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everyone, and thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers. I'm here each and every Friday with Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. You can keep the season going with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Friday, Gil. How are we doing today?
Happy Friday, Rachel. Doing well. Can't believe the year is almost over and the holidays are upon us. And we're getting up to the holiday break almost in the NHL, which is mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, and with the roster freeze and all of that going on, it's real. And in the meantime, the Pittsburgh Penguins are kind of slowly making a name for themselves. They had another exciting game last night. And here's Patrick Damp of Locked On Pens to give us a rundown of what happened.
Penguins here. We will have a full episode coming for you later this afternoon where we will recap the Penguins' massive 5-4 victory over the Nashville Predators, with Brian Rust once again playing the role of hero, scoring the overtime winner, as well as adding 4 points, 2 goals, 2 assists. Sidney Crosby also adds 4 points of his own, 3 assists, gets his first goal in 10 games, gets off the schneid in another great game from him. Yes, probably not the Penguins' best effort, but now that makes it their 8th win in their last 11, and they've got a huge test coming on Saturday night when they head to Newark to take on the division-leading New Jersey Devils. But for now, we will recap that game as well as get you set for Saturday night later this afternoon on a brand new Locked On Penguins. But for now, go Pens, and we will talk to you later this afternoon.
Coming from us, I don't know if go Pens is the right way to end that conversation, given the teams that we regularly cover. But I think you do, in fact, have to hand it to the Pittsburgh Penguins, especially given the way their season started, right?
Yeah, I mean, such a slow start. They struggled early, goaltending being a major issue for the Penguins. But again, to me, you see Sidney Crosby with a 4-point game, a goal and 3 assists. Brian Rust, a 4-point game, 2 goals, including the overtime game winner.
Right.
The leaders of this team are coming through with, some big performances. And when they've gone 8 of their last 11, that helps them rise above the mediocrity of all the teams that are fighting for those wild card spots in the Eastern Conference right now.
Yeah, and that's where the battle is, at least for the moment, right? In the wacky Metro division right now, where for a while now, we've had this top 3 teams bunch in the Devils, Caps, and Carolina. And then everybody else has been in this same mush that have been within 4 points of each other, right? Now, looking at the goal differential in the division as well, it is absolutely wild to me that the Pens are still, given everything they've done in their last, 10, 11 games, to Patrick's point, they're still negative 22 in their goal differential right now, which is the worst of those bottom 5 teams in the division, but they are the top in the standings of those 5 bottom teams in the division. And so you have to think at this point, yes, they're battling for a wild card spot, but they also have like 3 more games played than the Caps and the Hurricanes right now. So it's a little bit inflated, even if you think they could make that jump into the top 3. I don't think that's realistic at the moment, again, given the number of games played here. But that being said, are they now in a prime position for one of those wild card spots?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if they keep playing the way they've played recently, and they will be, and if you look at it, okay, they beat Nashville. We know Nashville is struggling. They beat them last night, but there are some quality wins in this 8 of their last 11. They've beaten the LA Kings. They've beaten the Toronto Maple Leafs. They've beaten the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. So, you know, the whole key for these bottom teams in the Metro and in the Eastern Conference who are all fighting for these wild cards, you can't undo the slow start, but if you play consistently and you start to, win 55-60% of your games going forward, those playoff spots are there for the taking if you can play consistently from here on in.
Well, and that's what's so interesting too, is because one of the biggest problems they had early going was goaltending, right?
Mhm.
And they're still not getting great goaltending. That's what's so fascinating about it as well, because, Jerry had 4 goals against in that game against Nashville. Even in a win, 3 goals against, 2 goals against, like 2 goals against is fine. But then, 5 goals against in their loss to Colorado on December 10th. And so he's still pretty up and down here, but I think, sometimes here the offense is overcoming the goaltending. And earlier in the season, they weren't scoring the goals.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I mean, again, they have played a few more games than some of the other teams, but right now, no team in the NHL has given up more goals this season than the Pittsburgh Penguins. And being dead last in team defense is not a formula for sustained success. You mentioned Tristan Jarry. I mean, he has a 3.62 goals against average for the season, only an 883 save percentage, and yet he's 7-4-2 record wise. The
Right.
team seems to be inspired to score when maybe they're so afraid he's so inconsistent. They know they have to score in order to win hockey games.
Right, and that's what's so interesting, because if you look at the league since December 1st, right? The Pittsburgh Penguins have the second highest goals for per game played, only to the Tampa Bay Lightning at 4.13. And then you look at their goals against per game played here, and it is 3.38. So it's lower, which is why they're winning, but it's still above that 3 goal, all important 3 goal threshold that we talk about, in terms of, in order to win games, you got to score more than 3 and allow less than 3. But they're still allowing more than 3 on average, even in this winning streak.
Yeah, and that just raises the question of, is that sustainable? Because
Right.
can you continuously, consistently score 4 goals a game? Most NHL teams cannot. Now, most NHL teams do not have Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin and
Right.
some of the top talent that the Penguins have, but their depth scoring has been another issue for most of the season. So, are they for real? I'm still skeptical until they get the defensive side of things and the goaltending side of things straightened away. It's a nice streak. It got them from last in the Metro to a playoff spot, if the season ended now, kind of a thing. But sustainability, there's got to be better defense and better goaltending over the long run, or when the hot goal scoring slows down, they're going to be back to mediocrity at best.
Right. And I think that's ultimately the conclusion we have to come to here, right? Is that the Pittsburgh Penguins, despite this recent streak, I think is still a little bit of a wait and see team, but they are absolutely in the hunt for a wild card spot. I do not think anything higher than that is attainable, even though on paper it may seem like that right now. And I am absolutely willing to eat those words because I think that, to your point, I think you're right about the sustainability here. I think this team has struggled with that in the last several years, and ultimately, I think that's kind of where things are going to end up. But will be fascinating to watch for sure. The Eastern Conference wild card race is going to be a slugfest, and the Pens will be a part of that. In the meantime, last night, the Edmonton Oilers also won an overtime game against the Boston Bruins. And, they might not have had their best performance either, but somehow eked out a win. We're going to talk about that and where the Oilers stand coming up next. Today's episode is sponsored by PrizePicks. If you love sports, you're going to love PrizePicks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any of your other favorite sports, PrizePicks makes it easy to get in on the action. And you can now win up to 1,000 times your money on PrizePicks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, PrizePicks makes it so easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. PrizePicks also offers fun weekly promotions like Taco Tuesday, where select player projections are discounted up to 25%. So download the app today, use the code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get $50 instantly after you play that first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, so the Edmonton Oilers managed to win 3-2 in overtime against the Boston Bruins last night. And here's our Locked On Oilers pal trying to figure out what happened in that game.
Oilers did not have their A game on Thursday night. I would argue that was probably like a C plus, B minus game at absolute best if we're grading on a curve. And they still managed to hang around long enough that I don't want to say they backed into a win, but they willed themselves to a win. McDavid put his head down and said, I'm getting this to the net. Even if I don't get the puck in, Hyman's going to be there and he might be able to jam it in. Finding a way to plug and plug and plug, like McDavid says, dig in here. We're going to make this happen. And the Oilers found a way tonight.
So, yeah, the Oilers found a way to win that game. And Zach Hyman was brought up there. And I think that's a really interesting place to start the conversation with the Edmonton Oilers. Again, given the streak they've had recently, we'll dig into that for sure. But December 4th, the announcement was made about the Four Nations rosters, and Zach Hyman did not make the cut. It was a splashy snub there, as you might say. Since then, Zach Hyman has 8 goals and an assist in 7 games. Do you think he is playing with a chip on his shoulder, Gil?
It certainly seems that way. And look, I think the big reason for Zach Hyman's exclusion is he got off to a slow start this year.
Yeah, he
And,
did.
He wasn't healthy for all of the games, and he wasn't, especially before the snub, wasn't playing particularly well. When you're an offensive guy and you only have, 3 goals, that's not going to get you on the team. So it's almost a blessing in disguise for the Edmonton Oilers that Hyman was snubbed, took it personally, and is now gone on a tear. And much more important for the Oilers to have a productive Zach Hyman for the middle part of this season than it is for him to play in the Four Nations.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think anybody is suggesting that he should have made the roster in any way, shape, or form. Again, given his slow start like that. But I do think that sometimes, when you're having struggles early in the season and something like this happens to you, that can be the motivating factor to kick your game into gear. And I think it certainly has to a large degree. And, we're looking at the standings here and looking out west, the Edmonton Oilers are now in that 3 spot in the Pacific Division there. They did not start out that way. 8-2 in their last 10 games and are slowly building a foundation here for a similar sort of season as they had last year, right?
Yeah, I mean, the slow start, you pick it up as the season goes along, and hopefully you peak at the right time. That is always the key. And it's amazing because they're 8-2 in their last 10, but LA is 8-1-1. Vegas is 7-2-1.
Yep.
Edmonton has separated themselves from the Calgarys and Vancouvers of the world, but they're still a close third in that Pacific Division, which is very competitive at the top.
Yeah, and that's why those in-division games in the Pacific are gonna be crucial, where, I do think that even though there is some chance here because Calgary and Vancouver are absolutely within spitting distance of Edmonton right now, and things could always change, but again, you look at things like the goal differential statistics. The Oilers are at +13, and that is a huge, huge difference between those other teams behind them. Um, we talked about with Pittsburgh, the goals for per game. Edmonton also is at above 4 goals per game for the month of December, and they are at 2.38 goals against. That's the big difference here between Edmonton and Pittsburgh, where I think like Edmonton is more for real, even if they have, a not great game and eke it out in overtime, like statistically and, just from a gameplay perspective, their defense has been performing so much better than Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and it's always the McDavids and the Draisaitls and the Hymans that make the headlines. But let's face it, the Oilers don't get to the Stanley Cup final last year and aren't competitive this year in the Pacific Division if they're not getting good team defense and good goaltending, and they are getting that right now. And you talked about Zach Hyman and how hot he's been as of late since the Four Nations announcement. How about Leon Draisaitl? He now has multiple point games, 7 straight, and he just reached 900 points, becoming the 5th fastest non-North American born player to reach the 900 point plateau for his career.
And that's pretty incredible here. And obviously Leon Draisaitl is because of him being German, is a very huge omission in the Four Nations
Yeah.
tournament because he cannot play. And I think that, I'm sure it probably makes him happy that he gets a break, but also like he would much rather play, right? Or have an opportunity to play and show what he can do on an international stage. But I think that, yeah, there's so many different sources here for the offense that Edmonton has right now. And they're just, playing an overall more buttoned up game here. And I certainly appreciate that. They probably could be doing a little bit better on the penalty kill overall, but their power play is top 10 in the league right now, I think. So, it's it's a really good time for Edmonton now. It's just a matter of getting through these like middle months and not letting those teams underneath catch them.
Yeah, and then just trying to arrange it so you peak at the right time heading into the playoffs. And you look at the underlying numbers. When you compare Pittsburgh to Edmonton, to me, Edmonton just seems a lot more sustainable.
Yep. I think so too. And, we'll see what the next sort of month looks like for them in terms of, what kind of competition they're facing. And, I think Ottawa Senators are kind of on a little bit of a roll right now. They face them soon. They're facing the Kings soon, but then they've got multiple games against the Ducks. They're facing Utah. They're facing the Kraken. They've got a game against the Blackhawks in mid-January. January 9th is a date I'm going to circle because that is when the Oilers will be facing the Penguins. And that's where it's like oil and water, like what is going to happen in this one. And I think that obviously we'll have to track these two teams for the next couple or few weeks, but that January 9th game is looking real appealing right now.
Yeah, that'll be a fun one, and a lot of really great, talented players going head to head. Uh, it may not be a Stanley Cup final preview, but it certainly will be an exciting game.
Absolutely. All right. Well, a really interesting story in Winnipeg has been their attendance over the last few years. And they're trying to turn things around there. And we're going to kind of dig into those numbers and kind of look at the business of season ticket holder and attracting customers alone using Winnipeg as an example. We're going to do that coming up next.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And hockey fans, use your knowledge of hockey and your favorite team to find interesting bets on FanDuel. Just head on over to FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
All right. So, like I teased before this segment, we're going to talk about NHL attendance right now. And it's really interesting to look at Winnipeg as an example of that because they're one of the smaller venues in the league. As we know, their capacity is a little over 15,000 for hockey. And they sold out every game in that arena from Jets 2.0 in 2011 through like just before the pandemic hit. They were already starting to falter off and they had broken that perfect attendance, I think, in 2019. So I think that there was just this expectation that because the building was smaller and there was a passion for bringing the Jets back and all of that, regardless of the season outcome, there was going to be perfect attendance just in perpetuity. And it seems like the organization got a little complacent and took their season ticket holders for granted. And then there was in Canadian terms, a precipitous drop off in attendance since then.
Yeah, I mean, they're at about 90% of capacity so far. And, that doesn't sound bad on paper, but when you think about the great start that this team got out to, and the fact that they're still in first place, even if they have cooled off from that, 15-1 start that they had early in the season, they have about 10,000 season ticket holders in a building that seats about 15,000. Now, a year ago, it was 9,500, so it's up slightly, but the league wants about 13,000 season ticket holders to keep the team sustainable. That's sort of the goal. And it may really, and I hate to say this, but it really may come down to, corporate support where, most teams, their season ticket holders are 50% corporate, whereas the Jets, it's about 20%. And, maybe unfortunately, the corporate support is a bigger indicator of the long-term health of some of these teams than the actual fan base itself.
Yeah, and I think that's really unfortunate because the corporate entity True North basically had said, yeah, we let down our season ticket holders. We don't have a good fan experience. There isn't good customer service available. And that's why season ticket holders walked away, in addition to, the economic realities of the day where NHL ticket prices have continued to go up over the last several years, regardless of economic indicators. A lot of teams have still raised ticket prices. And, the Jets are a very good team, right? And with a smaller venue, I know it's a smaller city, you would still expect them to sell out, right? And they just don't, even though they are a very good team. And that sort of speaks to the the customer service approach that we were talking about, and your point about the corporate revenue and suites and corporate season tickets and all of that as a huge part of the equation. And it's interesting to me from a wider perspective, right? Because you look at teams like the New York Rangers and the Toronto Maple Leafs, where there's running jokes about the suits on the lower level,
Right.
right? And how it's just corporate seats there, and the fan atmosphere is only good once you get upstairs, right?
Yep.
And, I have attended many games at Madison Square Garden. I have been to games in Toronto. And yeah, that is 100% true in terms of the atmosphere. And so when you're trying to, figure out this sales strategy, do you just go for the sale, or do you look at the bigger picture and the fan experience by having a different kind of environment in the stands?
You see, the whole thing with the fan experience, if you're a season ticket holder, you have to feel like the team values your presence there and that you are taken care of. I mean, you want a good product on the ice, obviously, but you're not going to have that every year. But do you get perks, whether it's better parking or lower cost parking, or meet and greet with the players a few times a year, special season ticket holder events? You have to feel like the organization values you. And if the Winnipeg Jets organization just thought they would roll out open their doors to the arena and say, we're here, come buy season tickets, that's not going to wash in the modern NHL. So they've got to accommodate and make their season ticket holders feel valued, that the team cares that they are season ticket holders and they benefit as a result.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that teams have tried to increase over the last several years is fan access to the
Mhm.
players, to team leadership. I've certainly seen it with the Flyers, where there's constant season ticket holder town halls
Yep.
that they hold, whether it's meet and greets with the players, like autograph sessions. The access at development camp for the Flyers has increased tremendously in terms of having even like the prospects available at big events, at the Flyers training center. And I think feeling like you have a say in what's happening with the team is extremely important. And when you kind of take your fans for granted and just assume that your games are going to sell out, you don't have to do those things. And but it could be to your detriment.
Yeah, and look, Winnipeg is a great market as far as the fans care. I mean, there's no doubt that there is a passion for the Winnipeg Jets. They lost their team once already. They don't want to have to lose it again. But at the same time, you've got to be treated right. You've got to be valued by the organization, and you've got to get value for the high amount of money that you're laying out if you're a season ticket holder.
Yeah, I also think another factor here is social media in a lot of ways, and that I think people demand a lot more access to the players, like on a personal level, right? And in a weird way, you don't get those things actually at the game, because you're in the stands, you're watching the game, and I get that, but the fan experience is such a combined thing these days, where it's a combination of, yes, enjoying the games, but knowing the individual personalities of these players. And you see teams like doing interviews as they walk off the ice sheet at practice, asking them a pop culture question, for instance. And that's how fans are getting to know these players. So then when they're watching the games, they keep an eye out for their favorite guys because they liked or had their favorite kind of dog or whatever it is, right? I just think that the in-game experience in some ways is diminished relative to that social media access experience. And fans feel like maybe they don't have to spend the money to be there because they're going to get what they want on social media. But it's like a delicate balance, right?
It is a delicate balance, and you got to find that balance. And, again, unfortunately, as we said earlier, the long-term sustainability of the franchise also may still rest with corporate buy-in, where, the corporations in the city or around the city are going to say, yeah, we're going to entertain our clients by getting season tickets, because that is more sustainable over the long run.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. But it's definitely, like I said, a tough balance. And, you do want to have that good fan atmosphere in arena, because that translates on television to the fans at home as well, and maybe encourages them to want to come to the game. So it's definitely a risk there. Really quickly, I want to shout out Murat Atesh at The Athletic, who's done some great reporting on the Winnipeg attendance, as well as Scott Stinson from The Score, who wrote about it recently as well. But that will do it for today's show. Thanks so much for listening. Gil will be back on Monday to talk to some hosts from around Locked On NHL about what's going on with their teams. And we will be back next Friday, but we won't see you until then. So have a happy holidays and Merry Christmas for those who celebrate in the meantime. And we will talk to you then. Thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. For your next listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a great day.